Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart. I'm back from my little mini vacation, and there certainly have been some things happening in regards to The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Reborn for Nintendo Switch 2. So, this game, there are so many questions about it. We know it's a big, full remake, but there's still so much to sort of interpret from what that actually means. Does that mean it's still going to basically kind of be like what we've seen with Star Fox, where the campaign is one-to-one? The levels are essentially structurally the same, they just look a lot better, and there's updated dialogue with a whole bunch of new cutscenes. Is that what we're looking at here, or is there more to this? Is this more than just a one-to-one copy of the original Ocarina of Time? And I feel I can say with some pretty strong confidence here that this is not a one-to-one copy. This is more than just a straight remake. This is going to be a bit of a reimagining. To what extent, that remains to be seen, but we do have evidence here to tell us that they are doing things that are unlike the original, that suggest that there will indeed be some structural changes here. And let me be clear, as I stated multiple times beforehand, if this Ocarina of Time remake is essentially what we're getting with Star Fox here, that wouldn't even be that bad. Because while the levels are one-to-one structurally, if you go ahead and play the demo, as I have, you will notice that it feels very fresh, very new. It controls so much better. And the dialogue is updated. There's a lot of extra little details. We're learning more about these characters within the actual levels, but then also there's a lot more cutscenes in between that tell us way more, that are totally new. And even the tutorial stage has been changed up a bit. Not to mention the prologue that also has some different implications from the original prologue in Star Fox 64. And then there's all the multiplayer challenge mode stuff on top of that. So if the Ocarina of Time remake is at least along those lines, I think that's so much to be excited about. But I am left thinking that this is more. And I think a lot of people have been in agreement with me on this until recently, because there was something that came out that might be suggesting otherwise, but also there was another thing that came out that might be suggesting a little bit different from that as well. And so we're getting into that and why this is not going to be a one-to-one remake today. But first, here is a brief message. I'm not really a jewelry or bling kind of guy, but I do like to look good, and I am a big fan of so many different games. So when King Ice, the sponsor for today's video, sent over these awesome necklaces, I had to take a look. As you see here with Sonic the Hedgehog and friends, there are hundreds of hand-set, brilliant cut stones. The level of detail here is just incredible, and it's beautiful. From all different angles, it's completely iced out. And all the gold, it's real 14K gold plating. And these are all officially licensed by Sega. There's even this nice Sega stamp on the back, so you know it's official. And then you have these custom boxes that they come in, with the Sonic logo in gold-colored foil. There's a really nice premium and refined look to these boxes. These are collector's items with great attention to detail that's true to the character's look and feel. And they're only available at kingice.com. But King Ice is responsible for so many other different designs and collaborations. As you see here, I'm scrolling through, there are so many different companies involved. Yu-Gi-Oh!, Persona, and so much more. So make sure to check it all out with the link in the description below using my promo code, ColdestRestart. So let's just start off with Nintendo's messaging on this game, because that's actually where this big update has come from. We've seen that Nintendo's been using the messaging to describe this as Ocarina of Time being reborn on Nintendo Switch 2. Even in the Nintendo Direct, Koizumi said just that. Take a look.
The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time will be reborn on Nintendo Switch 2.
And so that wording there to me is not tempering expectations, it's doing quite the opposite. And Nintendo's actually well known for tempering expectations here and being pretty clear and upfront about things, like with Star Fox. When they were talking about it in the beginning of the Star Fox Direct, they talked about how it was a remake with one-to-one levels structurally. Like, they were upfront about that. They have not made that kind of indication for this Ocarina of Time remake here. And so the messaging here is very different. They're going for something that's suggestive of something that is grander, bigger, which I do think makes sense because this is clearly being positioned as the big holiday title. And so if we have another one-to-one remake as like the big thing for this year, and there's not too many substantial changes there, I think that would speak a little poorly for Nintendo's lineup of this year. But if this Ocarina of Time remake is more than just a remake, something more along the lines of what Capcom has done with the Resident Evil games, where there have been significant reimaginings, then we're talking about a new Zelda experience that is a retelling of the Ocarina of Time legend, which to me makes a lot of sense. But where's the evidence to this? Well, we're gonna get to that, but first let me talk about this update that happened while I was away. So on the Nintendo Store page for the Ocarina of Time listing on Switch 2, if you right click and you click inspect and you see all that HTML code stuff, people found a description for Ocarina of Time that wasn't made fully public yet, and it read as this: the N64 Classic reborn as a full remake for Nintendo Switch 2. That line right there bodes extremely well for what I've been saying here, that this is a significant remake, a full remake, something with great ambition here. However, that does not promise necessarily that there will be reimagining, so let's also keep that in mind. But the description continues: experience Ocarina of Time with stunning visuals, as you've already seen a little bit of, updated designs. We've talked about that before in my initial analysis. Like, you look at the Deku Tree in the Tapestry, it's a very different looking version of the Deku Tree here. So we're going to be seeing some substantial design changes here. You look at Link, his green tunic is not even close to the same at all. This is probably the most different looking green tunic we've ever seen. It's made with actual leaves here, has a very different look. There's layers to it. And so clearly there are going to be some significant design changes here. And so when someone reads updated designs, when they're saying updated designs, they mean significantly updated designs from what we've already seen. But another part that was added, and this is where there's been some debate, is they said, and timeless gameplay. And so that part right there, where they say and timeless gameplay, you could interpret as unchanged gameplay, being essentially the same, having levels that are one-to-one, very much like the remake we've seen for Star Fox, which I think a lot of people could very easily buy into because Nintendo just did that, and we're seeing this description right here. But a couple things. One, Ocarina of Time's gameplay, the original, is not timeless. It's aged quite a bit. It's in need of significant improvements here. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you play Star Fox, the way it feels now with the HD rumble, with the subtle tweaks to the movements with the Switch 2 controls and how it just feels and flows, it feels fantastic, it feels like a modern game. And so it could still be the case that the overall world and the dungeons and all the levels and such are one-to-one structurally, but it still feels a lot better to play because the movement feels more spot on, more fluid, running at 60 frames per second as opposed to 20 FPS as it did on the Nintendo 64. Like, the game could feel a lot better. But if this is the case, then yeah, we're talking about basically a Star Fox level kind of remake here, which is still good, but is that actually enough to be Nintendo's holiday title this year? Is that enough to sell it as a full price game at $70 USD? And would that truly be fitting as the big holiday seller for this year, to ensure a strong year for Nintendo Switch 2? And that's where I'm a little skeptical. But interestingly, once this story got out, Nintendo made a change, a very quick change to this description. So now the description reads as this: the Nintendo 64 Classic returns for a new generation in 2026, reborn exclusively for Nintendo Switch 2. So the main point here is they took out that piece of timeless gameplay. And I think something to keep in mind here is that that wasn't actually made public. Like, it technically was public if you went and just right-clicked and did inspect, but it wasn't actually intended for people to see. It appears to have been an error because Nintendo immediately changed it. And so that timeless gameplay element was taken out, perhaps because it can be a little misleading, and maybe to my point, this isn't really a one-to-one remake and something a bit more grander, something a bit more beyond what we're seeing in Star Fox. They also add this other detail where the classic returns for a new generation in 2026. And I think that's kind of important to think about. A new generation. This is exclusive for the Nintendo Switch 2. This is a new generation, the next generation of Zelda, and so this is going to be our first true look at what the next generation of Zelda can look like. Nintendo's still hard at work on the next full new open-air Zelda. This, in a lot of ways, is going to be a bit of a teaser to that. Perhaps not too different, as I've argued before this was even announced, how Nintendo handled Wind Waker HD in a sense. Wind Waker HD was made when Nintendo was testing out the Wii U hardware when setting the groundwork for development on Breath of the Wild, Zelda U as it was called at the time. So this Ocarina of Time remake, there could be things about it where they were testing out the Switch 2 hardware, and some of those experiments will help the dev team of the next open-air Zelda adjust for that project. Another point I would like to make about Nintendo's messaging here, though, is that they are describing this as a full remake. I can't think of an example where Nintendo is using the terminology full remake, and listen, I think most of you will understand that there's a lot of the confusion between the terminologies of remaster, remake, reimagining, deluxe, definitive editions, all that different stuff. But when you use the term full remake here, that's kind of suggesting that all these other things that people accidentally or perhaps perceive as a remake, when there's clearly things that haven't been remade, if Nintendo goes and says it's been a full remake, it's suggesting that they're going all out here in remaking it, literally. But let me now talk to you about the evidence we have that shows that this is not going to be a one-to-one remake. So if you watch the original introduction to The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, or the 3DS version, I checked across both, they're the same, just the 3DS version looks a little bit better, but structurally, in terms of storytelling and from what we've seen of the environments, the same. This version of Ocarina of Time, not so much. So in the beginning of the original Ocarina of Time, the narrator is the Deku Tree. He's speaking in first person. However, what you'll notice in this teaser for the Ocarina of Time remake on Switch 2, the Deku Tree is being spoken of in third person. Someone else is talking about the Deku Tree here. And so, while this may be like the opening to the game, that's what it looks like, there's a different character narrating here. And so that suggests kind of a significant shift in the storytelling. But here's another significant shift in the storytelling. In the introduction, there's no mention of the supreme deities. Like, eventually they get to them, they talk about the three goddesses later on to the story, but not right from the get-go. That's another significant story adjustment there that we're seeing here. And this one might be the most significant detail. It's debatable because the whole narrator thing could mean another character has a more significant presence. I theorize perhaps Rauru, we'll see, or Kapora Gabora, perhaps being one and the same. But the other detail that might be a bigger deal, this was not in the original N64 version, this was not in the 3DS version. The depiction of the Triforce of Courage, on Link right in the beginning. This is something that does not develop until later on. Yet here, we are seeing this occur in what appears to be the very beginning of the game, the opening of the game. And that is a significant shift here. There's a lot of huge lore implications of that, and this is another suggestion that, from a story perspective, things are being done very differently here. So when you account for the deities, the narrator being different, and the inclusion of the Triforce, a huge plot element that's been shown off right in the beginning, I think these are some very significant things. I'll also remind you all, the Triforce took a significant backseat in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. It left fans wondering what's going on with that. It was kept very mysterious for the most part. Here, the Triforce is coming back to the forefront here, right in the opening cutscene of the game, it looks like. And so story-wise, we could be looking at some very significant adjustments here. Based on what we've seen of the Star Fox 64 beginning, I would say what we're looking at here for Ocarina of Times are even more significant changes here. Now, because Nintendo didn't really show us really that much, they just showed a little bit of Link, which I assume is in-engine, but it's not actual gameplay because Link is still sleeping, we're not moving him around. But you see his bed, and when you compare his bed and the room that houses the bed in the original 3DS version, there have been significant structural changes to the room. It is not the same kind of bed, it is not the same kind of room. It looks very different here. Like, there's rock, and there's just more going on, the shape is totally different. And so, if this is kind of what they're going for with significant design changes and structural changes to the levels, like, sure, even if things are meant to have a very similar style and progression with the level structure, they aren't going to feel the same if they're being depicted in this way, where it's not going to be one-to-one is my main point here. This room is not one-to-one with the original or 3DS version, which were one-to-one, and would also suggest this would be more significant than we've seen of Star Fox, which has one-to-one levels. Now, at the end of the day, we're just getting an angle of this room here. We're not seeing that much. To me, it's already clear that the room has a structural difference, but it's also not really that big of a deal because we're just seeing a room. Then the prior games was basically just like a circle. So the extent to which this is not one-to-one is still up for debate here. It's hard to say for sure just how big of a deal it is. But another thing I'll point out that I mentioned in my initial analysis, the tapestry that we're seeing, like I've been talking about, almost certainly the opening to the game. And like the most recent prior Zelda games, Breath and Tears, there was some kind of mural or tapestry. You can eventually see this in the game. Where would this be? The existence of this tapestry is another suggestion that we're talking about not one-to-one levels here, because this tapestry did not exist in Ocarina of Time or Ocarina of Time 3D. I theorize that this might be in the castle, but I've also wondered if maybe it's somewhere else. Maybe it's in the Forest Temple, for example, and you don't see this until years later, because this is talking about Link as a young boy in the forest, but maybe something like this would be created during the time skip, which would make some sense and is housed there. That makes sense to me. But also, to my point, regardless of where this tapestry is, it is an indicator that it's somewhere in the world to be discovered, in an environment that looks pretty different from anything we've seen before, meaning, yeah, this is not just going to be one-to-one. Another thing I'll point out, I've mentioned this many times in the various videos I've put in about the Ocarina of Time remake, we've seen a pattern where Nintendo's exploring around with the gameplay of having Navi interact with the screen and such and the environment. And so why are they putting together patterns like that? Perhaps because there are going to be some changes here. How extensive are those changes? Again, it remains to be seen. My main point, though, I'm trying to make for this video, and I feel like I've been hammering it home here, we have enough evidence to tell us that this is not totally one-to-one. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I will see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.